Hey everyone, remember Operation Anchorage for Fallout 3? Yeah, me neither. Operation Anchorage is not the worst Fallout 3 DLC, but it's pretty easily the second worst. And the reason for that is deceivingly obvious. It's just not Fallout. This engine was just simply not designed for a linear corridor shooter. Operation Anchorage took one of the weakest parts of Fallout 3, its combat, and decided, yeah, let's do a DLC that's just that. The conversation should be open and shut. The DLC was an experiment that didn't work because the devs chose to highlight the worst of Fallout 3 rather than the best of it. To me though, I think it's a little more complicated. What I find most frustrating about this DLC isn't its concept or its design, but its missed potential. Operation Anchorage was almost great. Let's talk about why. Operation Anchorage begins with a radio distress call from the Brotherhood Outcasts. In case you didn't know or you need a refresher, the Outcasts are members of the Brotherhood of Steel who believe that the leader of the faction in that game, Elder Lyons, has strayed too far from the original goal of the Brotherhood out west and also broken several rules. The Brotherhood in Fallout 1 and 2 are an isolationist, tech-obsessed cult who cares about nobody and has no interest in doing really anything beyond finding the best GPUs for their mining rigs. Is that a dead reference now? I think all those people moved on to scamming people with NFT Discord links. They have very little interest in helping the wasteland or even in gaining territory or political control. The Brotherhood's sole purpose is the management of technology, safeguarding advanced tech that in the wrong hands could lead to another apocalypse. The Brotherhood in Fallout 3 is nothing like this. They're goody two-shoes, they're open to outsiders, and their goals stem far beyond the control of technology. The Outcasts are the group that recognized and disagreed with the way that the Lion's Pride strayed from the Brotherhood's roots. As an isolationist faction, it is very weird that the Outcasts are calling for help in this DLC because it's, as mentioned, kind of antithetical to the way that they operate. They don't let in outsiders. Why would they be calling for help? You get the impression that this must be severely important if they've resorted to outsourcing in the same way that caused their schism with the Lion's Pride they exist to protest. Once you arrive at the location of their signal, you're briefed on what's going on. There's a stash of powerful pre-war military equipment that the Outcasts have found, but it's only accessed when an individual with a Pip-Boy completes a VR military training simulation from before the war. It's a simple setup and pretty gamey, you're literally fighting through a dungeon to get loot at the end of it, but it has potential and it hints at that potential several times. So, to start, let's talk about the major faction this DLC centers around, the Brotherhood Outcasts. The Brotherhood Outcasts are disastrously underutilized in Fallout 3. This is really unfortunate because, to me, they're without a doubt the most interesting faction that game has to offer. This is because, rather than being unambiguously good in every way like the Lion's Pride or unambiguously evil in every way like the Enclave, the Outcasts do have nuance, and in concept, they feel like an actual group of people. There is an ideological stance that these people believe in beyond we help people or we're doing a genocide. The game is pretty much devoid of other factions with genuine ideologies. I mean, you could make the case that the Republic of Dave has that kind of democracy thing going on. And in response to that, I would say, yeah, and thank you for proving my point by making the argument for me that Fallout 3's faction writing is so piss poor that the two factions integral to the main story are out-nuanced by the fucking Republic of Dave. The Outcasts are the most interesting faction ideologically, and they could have been incredible had they been integrated into the base game as a major player in the main plot. Imagine if, during the fight against the Enclave in Fallout 3, the major conflict between the Lion's Pride and the Outcasts was more center stage. Imagine if you're introduced to the two, and rather than having a tiny endgame button press decide your choice of faction, instead of choosing the Brotherhood or the Enclave for some reason, you had to choose which version of the Brotherhood you thought had the best chance to create stability in the capital wasteland. Yeah, the Lion's Pride is humanitarian and friendly and mostly open, but what if the wasteland needs more than that? What if generosity and acceptance are luxuries that this society can't afford right now? There could have been a serious, important philosophical struggle between these factions. In this proposed story, the player would have to choose factions based on how they actually feel and think, rather than having a good guy button and a bad guy button right at the end. If this isn't your jam necessarily, what if brokering peace between the Outcasts and the Pride was a core story beat? What if the Pride needed the Outcast technology, or the Outcast needed the Pride's manpower, something like that? This would serve really nicely as a neat little metatextual synthesis between the new and the old, the traditional Brotherhood and Bethesda's direction, the old guard fans and the new ones for whom Fallout 3 was their first. The old ideas of the Outcasts, and by extension the old fans, don't have mass appeal in the situation we find ourselves in, but the new ideas of the Pride, and by extension the new fans, lack substance, lack backbone, creativity, or direction. Finding peace between the two in-game Brotherhoods could have not only been satisfying in the text of the story, but outside as a commentary on the direction of the series. But instead of this, the Outcast's only quest in the base game is to collect scrap metal a whole bunch. And that's it. That's the most nuanced faction in the game. They've been reduced to a unique junk vendor. So yeah, Fallout 3 Brotherhood Outcasts aren't great, but the cool thing about DLC is you can fix your game's mistakes with it, and that's exactly what Fallout 3 already did with Broken Steel, allowing players to keep playing after the end of the main quest. The base game of Fallout 3 had a bad ending that nobody liked, so Bethesda said, fine, you want to keep playing, and we'll extend the main quest a couple hours, and have cooler set pieces with the robot you like, and everything will be fine, and we'll prove we're good at making Fallout games, I promise, believe me, it was okay, it was a mistake, it won't happen again. I'm not perfect, but you love the robot guy, right? You love the robot guy. Seeing that Operation Anchorage is a game that starts with and deals with the Outcasts, I thought it would do the same thing. They squandered their opportunity to integrate them into the main quest, but the DLC is an opportunity to at least utilize them in a better way, in any way that leads them to their inherent potential. Instead of that, you show up, the outcasts are rude to you, you get put in the VR simulation, and you don't deal with the outcasts again until the very end of the DLC. Who signed off on this? The DLC that should have fleshed out the outcasts, that could have been about the outcasts, only involves the outcasts in the first and last 10 minutes of its runtime. Okay, but this is only one part of Operation Anchorage's potential. Surely they live up to the rest of it. The simulation, as mentioned, takes place in a military VR training sim where, get this, if you die in the game, you die in real life. Oh my god, oh my. Except you don't, really. You just respawn like you normally do in Fallout 3. This is the first glimpse at the missed potential of the simulation itself. The idea of a fully VR simulation within the already existing simulation that is Fallout 3 has a lot of potential for cool ideas about AI, about the structure of video games, all things that would feel like immersion breaking in regular Fallout 3, but you can explore here because you're in a fiction within the fiction, so poking holes at the idea of interactive fiction doesn't break the established rules of the quote-unquote reality of the base game. Operation Anchorage hints at a few of these. For example, at a few points in the DLC you can get special stat checks or regular pieces of dialogue where you try to subvert the simulation or call it out for what it is. This is great. The idea of telling an AI that it's an AI and talking down to it is super cool, but in almost every case, it's torn away from you. Haha, you're a simulation, idiot. You're a stupid computer. You don't know anything. You're a stupid computer.
Ho ho ho. No.
This is no simulation, soldier.
This is made all the more frustrating by the fact that the general at the end of the DLC knows he's a simulation and addresses it directly.
Since you've completed the training, it's time to report to your commanding officer for your debriefing. Dismissed.
There's so much more that could have been done here, and it feels like the writers knew it and wanted to do something with it, but it got cut. So what did it get cut for? Well, the structure of Operation Anchorage is a linear shooter. There are a couple missions, but most of them are the same, so I'll knock them out quick. You're in a cool snowy mountain area, notably the first time to my knowledge that the series has ever taken you to a snowy environment, so that's cool and new. You're an American soldier in Alaska fighting the area back from the Chinese army. You do this by running through corridors and shooting dudes in the face until they die. But sometimes they're invisible or they have flamethrowers. That's basically like interesting combat. Rather than the typical Fallout 3 inventory system, the DLC adds convenient full heal stations and full ammo stations in each level, a very gamey solution to a problem that didn't really exist. Managing healing items and low ammo pools was one of the few fun parts of Fallout 3's combat, but I guess these stations allow for a more fast and frantic style of combat, which isn't more fun, but it's definitely different. I guess. Once you get through the first set of corridors, you have to destroy some artillery guns. Wait, snowy environment, destroying artillery guns in combat arenas with military troops. Hey, do any of you smell burning toast? Once this is over, you get the slightly more fun part of the combat rooms, where you get a sort of half-assed squad management mechanic. You're given 2 missions, and you get to choose what kind of troops you take with you, whether they be foot soldiers, snipers, grenade troops, or a sentry bot. But you're taking the sentry bot, don't kid yourself. After doing these 2 combat arenas with your squad of companions, you get your final mission to siege the Chinese army base and kill their leader. This is where I want to pause to talk about the third major shortcoming of the DLC, the promising nature of it as a piece of living pre-war America military propaganda, and the very little that this DLC does to make any sort of elaborated point about it. Fallout as a property is full of criticism of American exceptionalism and consumerism, at least it used to be, but Fallout 3 had it. The whole Red Scare 50s Americana of the pre-war period is directly a satirization of these kinds of ideas. So is Liberty Prime, so is the Enclave, and so is the VR simulation in Operation Anchorage. One of the things you need to understand in order to appreciate the few good things we got from this DLC is that the simulation isn't a replaying of events. This isn't history in the Fallout universe, this is what Fallout universe pre-war Americans thought history would play out like. This is a training simulation by the US military, full of biases and assumptions and fictions. This reflects in how the training plays out. It's an action movie meant to make the soldiers feel like action heroes, and that's funny, but the DLC isn't a comedy. It refuses to do full comedy, and it also refuses to have a serious elaborated point, so the bits of each that do exist feel less like the point of the expansion and more like intermissions from the shooting. What I'm saying is that Operation Anchorage was perfectly set up to do exactly what the film adaptation of Starship Troopers did. Like the stuff with the AI, it really does feel at points like they wanted to do this. The action movie structure, the characters all being cartoonish, badass military guys, it all points to that kind of presentation. The biggest piece of evidence, though, is the final meeting with General Jing Wei, the Chinese army leader. When you meet him, you can pass one singular speech check and Jing Wei turns his sword around and falls on it. Oh yeah, he just has a sword, by the way. But anyway, yeah, he falls on his sword. This is probably in my top 3 for the funniest moments in any of Fallout 3's DLCs, because it's absolutely insane. First off, it's one speech check. This isn't new territory for Fallout 3 though, so on its own it's not the full joke. The full joke is that this guy is committing seppuku, a practice of Japanese samurai. This modern day Chinese commander is doing an ancient Japanese ritual suicide, and that's absurd, and it's hilarious, because it's exactly what you'd expect portrayal of the enemy in an American military simulation to be like. It's a cartoon, but further, it's a cartoon that's portraying exaggerated conduct from an entirely different country than the one they're fighting. It's great, and I wish the rest of the DLC was full of more stuff like this, but it isn't. This is the only real notable example. So the Outcasts are underutilized in the DLC, even though they are already underutilized in the base game, but even the substitution the DLC puts into the simulation, pre-war conflict, America satire, etc., falls short of its potential too. They had the third option of taking it in the AI direction, but they didn't really do that either. Nothing works, and the frustrating part is it's so obvious to me how they could have made it work. I have a few ideas. First, add breaks and intermissions. Have the Outcasts pull you out of the simulation every couple simulation missions for one reason or another. The simulation short circuits, or the base is attacked, maybe another layer of the simulation is revealed. You complete a mission in the sim chair, but then there's a real-life test afterwards. Really anything that would get you to work with the Outcasts rather than for them. This would allow the game to engage with a faction the base game ignored. Bethesda could fix their mistake. And that would work, but I think my ideal change would be to make the simulation a group effort. Have the player go into the simulation with an outcast, 2 outcasts, or, and I don't know how the story would have to twist to make this happen, an outcast and a member of Lion's Pride. The key word here is contrast. I would say substance, but that feels rude. With a member of the Outcasts with the player, they could see how an Outcast reacts to the simulation, getting to know them and their faction in the process. The same could go with the Lion's Pride member. You learn about the characters with you, maybe make some decisions about whose opinion is more correct based on the situation, and you reach a conclusion where you side with the Outcasts, side with the Pride, or through careful balance and skill use, find some compromise between the two. I mentioned that this could have been possible in the base game too, but at the very least, do it in the DLC. Like, come on, please? Please. Come on. Come on, do it for me, please. That solves the problem with the Brotherhood Outcasts and could also help with the problem of the military stuff too to some extent, but on top of that, I'd like to say pick a lane of satire. The DLC should be about the Brotherhood, don't get me wrong, but a healthy dose of satire around the AI or the Starship Troopers stuff could give a good buffer to that. By ripping the player out of the simulation every now and again, or putting another person from the wasteland in the simulation's contents could be contrasted with the wasteland. This is what Anchorage was missing. Allow the player to draw parallels between what's happening in the simulation and what's happening to the outcast so that they can come to a conclusion about both that's thematically and narratively satisfying. Imagine going into the Anchorage campaign with an outcast and a Pride member, but the silliness is turned up way further. Then imagine that the Lion's Pride member is taking it completely straight. They buy all of it, meanwhile the outcast is cynical. They're driven less by helping people, whether they're real or not, and more goal-oriented, whereas the Lion's Pride member gets caught in the emotional fiction. The Pride Paladin wants to help liberate Anchorage, and the outcast is making fun of them the whole time because the people aren't real, it's all about the tech. Think about what new things that sort of dynamic could show the player about the Lion's Pride, about the outcasts, and about the strength of pre-war propaganda. I guess my big point here is that DLC shouldn't just give players new things to do. They should give a new angle to look at the existing story. New details and new perspectives are more important than new enemies or weapons. This is what makes New Vegas' DLC so good by comparison, but that's for another time. I feel like Operation Anchorage has been forgotten. Alongside the Brotherhood Outcasts, it could have worked in so well. I like the Outcasts. They were one of the parts of Fallout 3 that made me go, oh, that's a really cool idea, like Harold and the Oasis or the superheroes at Canterbury Commons. I like to talk a lot of trash about Fallout 3 on this channel, but it genuinely does have a lot of cool things hidden in there. Operation Anchorage had the promise of more of these things. An exploration of the Brotherhood Outcasts, a deeper look into pre-war mentalities, and it could have given a commentary on how these two connect. This is what Operation Anchorage was missing, and why I don't want people to forget about it. There was a story here worth telling, and one day I hope it can finally be told, either through a mod or through Bethesda bringing the Outcast back for Fallout 5 in, 2031 or whatever. Thank you to my patrons on screen now, and a special thank you to Jack Bradley, Spritz, and Adam Souza for pledging at my highest tier. More classic ramblelime mod reviews on the way. I've got a whole load of stuff planned to work on from now through to 2023, and I can't wait to show you them. See you then. Bye.